Hello YouTube. Today I will talk about subjects that are united by one theme, describe phenomena virtually unknown to most people. But actually some people might recognize what I'll tell you about Eurasian cases and recall something similar in their own homelands. Deserts, mountains, lakes and forests. The remarkable Soviet geochemist and mineralogist Alexander Yevgenyevich Fersman, who passed away in 1945, returning from an expedition to Central Asia, in one of his scientific publications stated that sapphire and cobblestone are entities overflowing with other life energies, showing their temper, spontaneous movements, stubborn sticking to places where they are located, flights to and from, and other tricks, sometimes actually foreshadowing tragic events. Let's look at some supporting evidence. One of the manholes leading to the Kerch quarries of the Crimea Peninsula was blocked for almost 300 years by a huge boulder of amazing red-pink color with snow-white encircling stripes. Local residents, ethnic Greeks, considered the stone to be the home of an evil spirit and avoided it. Therefore, when on June 21, 1941, a boulder was moved with a bulldozer knife, intending to use it as a tombstone on the mass grave of the heroes of the Russian Civil War, the local people murmured and talked and said the spirit was angered. There will be trouble. The trouble, however, paused, showing miracles, so to say. Every single small and medium-sized stone in a circle in an area around of 150 meters began to move chaotically to match the Brownian motion. Without permission, bell that used to wake up local enterprise workers began to ring. In the warehouses of the nearest military unit, 3 boxes of ammunition exploded without any cause, external pressure, so to say. An hour passed and the red and pink giant boulder stopped dead in its tracks and calmed down. Not for long. The next day, the Great Patriotic War began. This is how we in the Soviet Union referred to the World War II. And that is the day Nazi Germany attacked the Soviet Union. It was on June the 22nd. And curiously enough, the boulder continued to play tricks, setting fire to the grass and ironing the bushes until the enemy was driven out from the Soviet Union. All those years, that's what it was doing. In the early 1950s, the beautiful monolith was sawed into pieces and used for finishing work. Everything went smoothly without any signs of devilry, which cannot be said about the events of the second half of the 18th century. In the Kuskovo estate, owned by the chief chamberlain of the Russian imperial court, Count Sheremetyev, who passed away in 1809. Here's what the fortress architect Argunov told about the revelry of the devil or the evil stone. Please understand that I will be translating from the Russian language as spoken in the fabulous 18th century. And here it goes. Where the filling of the pond was being prepared, there was a large voluminous stone on which, using it as a base, it was decided to build a cleanly planed, uncoated chapel. The stone had to be removed from the pit, straightened out, to work on it. No matter how hard the 6 horses, harnessed together, pulled, they did not move the daredevil. If the stone swayed a little, the grass beneath it and on the hill would burst into flames. The land would rise up, and the far large pond would overflow its bank, covering the kennels and the 5 houses of the servants. The astonished foreman, Ilya, Pokrovskych shouted, "Damn you! Take you away completely." The water broke and the grass burning stopped. The devilish stone was cracked, becoming a material suitable for the construction of the foundation. The chapel, where the human graveyard is, was cut from wood. They didn't have time to consecrate it. On Pokrov, that's the Russian Eastern Orthodox Christian holiday, that chapel was incinerated, catching fire from below. Well, some stone that loves peace do not move it, so that grief will pass by. There are any number of stones anywhere that adore physical movement. On the territory of Kazakhstan, not far from the town of Semipalatinsk, there is a vast stretch of forest steppe called the Wandering Field from ancient times. The rounded boulders at that place, for some reason, only in the winter months, start running in different directions, plowing throughout the wavy, ragged furrows. In 1832, the salt merchant Ivan Troitsky had the opportunity to observe the development of such phenomenon. In a letter sent to his brother Kirill in Omsk, he writes, "Stones do not roll, they run, crawl on one side, scattering visible even in the sun bundles of sparks. The stones plow tolerably well without sowing anything. That's why nothing grows on the bald spots where they frolic. The gray air envelops them. It is easier to breathe on the field than in the surrounding area. At the same time, the soul is oppressed. Melancholy rolls over. The sooner one gets in the saddle and rides off from there, the better." The impressions of the salt merchant Ivan Troitsky are indistinguishable from what the deacon of the Pereslavl Semenov Church, Antony Petrushev, experienced at the end of the 18th century, when unsuccessfully tried to calm the blue stone, which did not give rest to the Orthodox people, by the fact that buried deep and even pinned down by an earthen mound, it sometimes slept peacefully for 6 months, then suddenly shot out of the mound as if a cannonball. Let's look at the information about the blue wish-granting stone of Russia. A few kilometers from the Pereslavl-Zalesky, on the shore of Lake Plesheyev, there is an archaeological monument, the Kleshinsky complex. Plesheyev Lake is one of the largest and cleanest reservoirs in central Russia. It stretches inland for 9.5 kilometers, and its greatest depth reaches 25 meters. At the bottom of the reservoir, there are streams, so in its lower layers, a constant temperature is kept all the time. The lake is also famous for the fact that it is home to a rare relict fish, freshwater herring. However, people come here not only to admire the beauty of nature and see relict fish or do fishing. On the shore of Plesheyev Lake lies a huge boulder, the famous blue stone, about which people say that it can fulfill wishes. Its gray-blue surface barely rises above the ground, but locals claim that the stone is alive. It is enough to put your hand on it to make sure of this. From the mysterious boulder comes a palpable warmth, as if it has absorbed the heat of the earth's interior. They say that if you sit on it, many diseases go away, and women are cured of infertility. But even if this is not true, it is a pleasure to sit on that rock. At the same time, the person involuntarily relaxes and falls into a state close to meditation. According to rumors, if you break off a piece of the blue stone, grind it into powder, and take it internally, then all the diseases will surely recede. The blue stone has been lying on the shore of Plesheyev Lake since time immemorial. In ancient times, the Finno-Ugric tribes settled here, and then came the Slavs. The ancestors of the Slavs were pagans. They worshipped the wind, the sun, trees, water, rocks. Apparently, the blue stone was one of their idols. It was decorated on holidays. Merry games were arranged near it, and even sacrifices were made to it. The first settlement on the western shore of Pleshev Lake appeared more than 2,000 years ago. Apparently, the ancient Finns were attracted by the Alexander Mountain, which rises 30 meters above the water surface and is separated from the rest of the territory by deep ravines. The settlers built a flat area on the top of the mountain, on which they constructed buildings that served apparently sacred purposes. At first, the blue stone lay on this platform. In the middle of the 10th century AD, Slavic settlers who replaced the Finns, who made the mountain a place of worship for their god Yarila, and the site on its top was called Yarila Boltpech. About the same time, the town of Kleshchin appeared not far from the mountain, on the site of which Pereyaslav later appeared. With the arrival of the Slavs and their subsequent adoption of Christianity, the buildings on the mountain were destroyed, and a Christian Orthodox church was erected in their place. And yet the belief in the miraculous properties of the stone continued to live. It was still worshipped. Christian Orthodox priests used to frighten their flock that the devil lived in the blue stone, and those who bowed to it actually served the unholy, which meant that they would burn in hell. However, neither admonition nor intimidation helped. The old and the young went to the stone, and leaving their modest offerings near it, whispered a cherished wish, which, as they say, was sure to be fulfilled. The outraged fathers of the church demanded to throw the cursed idol from the mountain, which was done, however, without eagerness or zeal from the local population. But nothing has changed. People just gathered for the performance of pagan rites near the stone that lay at the foot of the mountain. At the beginning of the 17th century, the Holy Church decided to put an end to idol worship. On the orders of Tsar Vasily Shuisky, the deacon of the local church dug a deep hole, pushed the stone into it, and covered it with soil. About 15 years passed, and one day the fisherman who came to the shore of Pleshev Lake observed that the boulder was lying in its former place. How this stone, weighing 12 tons, got out from the ground, and even in such a short time, no one knows. And again, the pilgrimage to the blue stone began. In 1788, a church was built in Pereslavl. To stop the pagan debauchery, they decided to put the devil's stone in the foundation of the bell tower under construction. When winter came and the lake was covered with reliable ice, the boulder was hoisted on a specially made huge sled and was carried along the ice path. However, not far from the shore, when they were taking a sleigh across Plesheva Lake, the blue stone fell off the sled, turned red hot, melted the ice broke, and the blue stone went to the bottom of the lake. To a depth of 5 meters, it seemed forever. Fishermen in clear weather saw that stone underwater, but a year later the fisherman noticed that the stone was slowly moving towards the shore, straight to its old place. It took about 40 years before the stone was on the shore, but something did not lie still for it. The mysterious stone began to slowly go underground. If in ancient times the blue stone was visible from afar because it towered above the ground by 1.5 meters, now the soil has almost swallowed it up, and those who came to admire the miracle boulder see only a small area of about 30 centimeters high. Some old-timers believe that once the stone goes into the ground, hiding from human eyes, it means that the end of the world is coming. As the locals say, it is not for nothing that an ancient boulder emits blue rays at night, and in winter the snow melts on it. It must give some signs that no one understands yet. Well, modern Russian scientists unfortunately do not care about the properties of the world of mysterious stones. Now, Chinese geophysicists are another matter. According to the Russian researchers, Chinese scientists taking as a working hypothesis that the atypical or non-typical behavior of boulders is obviously associated with the release of the strongest gravitational and anti-gravitational energies of geopathic faults, they, armed with all hearing and all seeing equipment, went to Tibet, where they set up camp near the oldest northern monastery, whose monks have been writing the life of the so-called Buddha stone for 1,500 years. According to legend, his palms were imprinted on the stone. This shrine weighs 1,100 kilograms. It climbs a mountain with a height of 65 meters and descends from it along a spiral trajectory, drawing circles at the upper and lower points. So it goes up and down. Okay? Each lift is exactly 16 years, circling around the mountain, and at the top takes half a century. Scientists of the People's Republic of China, with the help of laser rangefinders, acoustic seismic sensors, night vision devices, found that visually the movement of the boulder is impossible to notice. Nevertheless, the maximum speed developed by it reaches 1/3 of a kilometer per hour. A faint glow surrounds the crawling stone. There are also sounds of a low key, something like an inarticulate old man's mumble. The final conclusions made by a group of scientists or Chinese researchers are consistent with the long-standing hypothesis put forward by that Soviet scientist Fersman. Scientists suggest that the mobile stone structures are a manifestation of siliceous or silicon life forms. At the same time, boulders become more active, begin to show themselves where people are constantly gathering, passionately wanting the same thing. The frequency spectra of the super weak radiation of the subconscious mind, superimposed on the frequency spectra of the super weak radiation of silicon inclusions of stones, enter into resonance, generating tangible kinetic energies. And our, meaning human group subconscious mind, regardless of our will, seems to be playing tricks on us. Stone organisms whose age is of the scale for millions of years, even billions of years, figuratively speaking, begin to behave like heated wax on which the subconscious desires of people are imprinted. Captivating and fascinating, isn't it? But let's look at another related phenomenon. The Sangobila is a mythical beast that supposedly lives inside the mountains. It is terrified of the light. People say the beast even would be dying from being exposed to the light. Listen to this. In the mountains of Sogda, the invincible army of Iskander Zulkarnain, Alexander the Great, had to suffer a setback for the first time. The Macedonian phalanx could not build a proper formation in the narrow gorges, and many of the mountaineers who attacked it had impenetrable armor made of the skin of a local animal that lived in the depths of the mountains. Back in the 1970s, Russian journalist Alexander Ziborov wrote about these lines for himself. He wrote them out from a rare manuscript, a collection of folk legends collected by medieval thinker Ahmad al-Hujandi. Ziborov found this work in a special department of the Firdousi Republican Public Library in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, meaning belonging to the Republic, Central Asian Republic. But he paid attention to these words only because Ziborov remembered a strange incident from his own childhood. In 1966, the guys from their residence on Abdullah Commander Street and he also often drove to the mountains. They made their ways to the mountains. Usually they went to the most picturesque Varzob Gorge, located about 30 kilometers from Dushanbe. Each time they went deeper and deeper. Once the group went further than usual, turned into a side gorge. The guys walked for an hour on it and came across a donkey with bags of firewood on its back. Next to it lay a huge stone monolith, which broke away from the parent rock, fell down and split into several parts. They remembered that there had been an earthquake the night before. Most likely because of this, the rock collapsed. Near one rock fragment, a local resident was sprawled on the ground. Putting one hand under the stone, he was trying to pull something from under it. Finally, with a cry of joy, the Highlander pulled a flat blood cake out from under the boulder. The guys gasped in surprise, recoiling. Then they saw that it was some kind of animal, crushed by a block of stone. The entrails were squeezed out in a bloody mess, and it was disgusting to look at. But the man did not seem to notice. He was just happy. He told the boys that it was a stone beast that lived in the rocks. He stressed, seeing their distrust, not in the soil and not under the stones, but inside the rocks. The Highlander explained, it eats them, creates passages inside the mountain. Its skin is so tough that even a bullet from the rifle will not penetrate it. With these words, he took out his sharpest knife and swung several times at the remains of the stone animal, but the blade did not even enter a millimeter into what was left of the beast. Of all the guys, Ziborov was the only one who dared to repeat the experiment with the same success. The Highlander happily told them that his grandfather knew how to make boots out of hide. He boasted that they can then be worn forever. Only from time to time you need to replace the thread. This shoe was worn by his fellow villager Mirzorahim. His father wore it, his grandfather wore it, his great-grandfather wore it, and many ancestors before him wore it. Then the grandsons of Mirzorahim's grandsons will wear it and remember it. Personally, this man, the mountaineer, he saw such an animal for the first time. In their kishlak, or village, only Musafed Bobo Ali once, as a boy, came across a stone beast in a cave at night, but couldn't catch it. The Highlander showed the boys an almost irregular oval hole, about 30 centimeters in diameter, under the rocks. He said that it was eaten by this very beast. Ziborov touched the edges, and the stone felt very hard. Ziborov thought that even with steel tools, you would be worn out to punch it, that hole. The walls of the manhole were polished. There were no other words for it. It is clear that this case is imprinted in Ziborov's memory. And then suddenly he reads about Alexander the Great, that story, and about mountaineers dressed in impenetrable armor made of the skins of an unknown mountain animal. It occurred to Ziborov that it was the animal that he had seen in the Varzob Gorge. Ziborov's imagination was fired up. At that time, he was working as a correspondent for the newspaper Evening Dushanbe. the journalist decided to collect materials and write a sensational story about these amazing animals, which is still unknown to science. He was anticipating that controversy would be made based on his writing. So he came up with a catchy name, Who Are You Who Lives in the Rocks? Zyborov approached various departments of the Academy of Sciences of Tajikistan, asked the employees there what they knew about the stone beast, but none of them could say anything. Many doubted its existence at all. Some looked at Zyborov skeptically, others with a grin or laughter. It was felt that some were ready to turn a finger at the temple, or as we say in Russian, call him crazy. No one was convinced by the story of Zyborov's childhood, nor by the passing mention in an ancient legend of impenetrable armor made from the skin of some animal. They shrugged their shoulders. They say you never know what people can invent. Of course, the article did not come to be. With great regret, Zyborov put an end to his imagination's plans and came down to live a bleak Soviet existence. About 5 years later, in the fall, Zyborov was picking cotton in the Java Valley. That was the compulsory labor event that Soviet people had to go through. We won't talk about why it was done and so forth. Let's just continue. In the evening, during a conversation, he talked about the stone beast. Among the group was a Pamir Mountains man from Garm. So he suddenly said that he had heard of such an animal. Only in his area the animal is called Sangobila, stone bubble in Russian. The old man said that once they were found in the rocks, and then later they were gone. 2 years later, an amateur local historian and folklorist, Alim Khurshedov, brought the proverbs and sayings he had collected in the Pamir Mountains to the editorial office of the newspaper where Zyborov worked. While selecting the best ones for publication, to the journalist's surprise, he came across these lines: "Afraid of the sun like a Sangobila." A footnote on the same page said, "The Sangobila is a mystical beast that supposedly lives inside the mountains. It is terrified of the light, they say, even dying from it." Zyborov began to interrogate Khurshedov, but he knew nothing more. He only said that he wrote down this saying in the village of Maymurud near Khorog. He admitted that he wanted to throw it away because such a beast seemed too fantastic, but still left it. Zyborov told him everything he knew about the stone bubble. The folklorist became enthralled with the idea of organizing an expedition in search of this unknown animal. A couple of weeks later, he called and boasted that the Institute of Oriental Studies had agreed to finance it. But then the famous or infamous events of 1992 began. The civil war in Tajikistan, this Central Asian country, and no one cared who lived in the rocks anymore. Zyborov never saw Khurshedov again. He went missing like so many people at that time, and Zyborov later moved to Russia. He wrote years later this long-planned article, and I told you about his discoveries. But I cannot locate the journalist to find out more and to share my research with him about other strange phenomena that is said to exist in Eurasian mountains. Okay, but let's look at some other phenomena, somewhat related. Evidence shows that it is in the mountainous areas that people most often begin to experience a sense of unreasonable fear. And it is there that people, even entire groups, are most often found dead at the same time from inexplicable reasons, often with expression of horror on their faces. Evidence shows that it is in the mountainous areas that people most often begin to experience it. Biologists and biophysicists who conducted research in special infrasound chambers revealed many reactions of humans and animals to infrasound of various frequencies and intensities. There is also a feeling of unaccountable fear, headaches and heartaches, loss of balance, forced vibrations of internal organs and blood vessels, and at high intensities and a fatal outcome. With infrasound of sufficient intensity, a person, like animals, loses control of himself or herself and will unconsciously seek to leave the danger zone. And if a ship gets into the area of intense infrasound, then the behavior of the crew will be similar to the behavior of people in skyscrapers during fires. They jump out of windows from any floor. Most likely this is how ships with the missing crews appear, and with a high intensity of infrasound, and with a dead one when rescuers discovered that people died suddenly and simultaneously. That happened too. By the way, such deaths from infrasound in reinforced concrete facilities were recorded during the First and Second World Wars. Their walls were not destroyed by the impact of concrete piercing shells, but the acoustic wave inside its impact was deadly. For the first time in official reports, the effects of infrasound on humans were recorded in the 1920s. During the expedition of Barchenko to the Kola Peninsula, you can find detailed descriptions of this strange expedition in my earlier videos. It should be noted, however, that the biological effects of infrasound, as well as natural sources of infrasound themselves, were not known to the members of the expedition. In the area of Sade Lake, according to the stories of the expedition member, astrophysicist Kondiayin, their group experienced various negative feelings, including unaccountable horror. When exploring the entrance to the cave, apparently of artificial origin that cave was, the member of the expedition who entered immediately had a feeling of overwhelming horror, and according to him, he also had a feeling like he was slowly being flogged. By the way, the same cave of horror called Sumgan is located in the foothills of the Urals. Those who study caves, who try to explore this cave and reach the second bottom, recall a feeling of incomprehensible, unfounded fear. The same phenomena are observed in the Kashkulak cave located in the spurs of the Kuznetsk Alatau in Khakassia. In the Kolevan underground galleries in the central Altai, researchers describe cases when a feeling of inexplicable fear suddenly arises. In addition to these places, they hold the record in Russia for the number of people who have disappeared without a trace, even entire groups. It should be noted that there's infrasound generated by tectonic processes, and underground cavities of natural and artificial origin serve as a kind of acoustic resonators for this, repeatedly amplifying it. Okay, but let's return to the events of the Kola Peninsula. On one of the passes, late in the 20th century, 4 tourists were killed. People lay in a line stretching from the pass to the nearest dwelling. They died before reaching only 200 meters to the nearest house, having run about 7 kilometers. No signs of violence were found on their bodies, but all the faces were frozen with horror. Something similar happened in the late 1950s in the Kola Peninsula, when climbing the Angvunda shore peak. Then 2 experienced climbers died. Their comrades fled from the valley, leaving their bodies and all their equipment behind. They claimed that they were suddenly seized with a feeling of wild horror. Another group of 4 people died in the same area for a unknown reason in the summer of 1965. They also fled, abandoning their tents and equipment. A few years later, a group of 11 people died. An official investigation has declared the cause of their deaths to be mass mushroom poisoning. Okay? In the early 1990s, the Russian magazine Terminator received 2 letters at intervals of about a year in between from military personnel who served in that region, and then from relatives of other military employees. In both cases, similar tragedies occurred. In the first, a group of 4 officers, well armed, went hunting and then were found dead with expressions of horror on their faces. In the second, a similar tragedy occurred in an abandoned hunting hut. And the list of such stories is far from complete. Unfortunately, until recently, the problem of human exposure to infrasound of natural and artificial origin was not in demand by modern science. And only when there were emergencies in railway transport in connection with the appearance of powerful low-speed diesel engines that generate infrasound in the 1970s, experts from the Leningrad Institute of Railway Transport, together with the Sanitary and Hygienic Institute, on the basis of the latter, built an experimental infrasound chamber that began to conduct joint research. A little later, geophysicists became interested in infrasound as a harbinger of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. And immediately it turned out that there are no acceptable size acoustic transducers. The wavelength of infrasound with a dangerous frequency of 7 Hz is about 50 meters. Unfortunately, for the same reason, there are no portable devices for recording infrasound suitable for use by tourists, climbers, and cavers. But as we can see from the cases listed above, ignorance of the danger or disbelief in it can be deadly. And of course, much of it occurs in the mountains. That's why I wanted to bring it here. I will stop here now, but I do have more strange phenomena emanating from other mountains. Not only in Russia, of course, but Eurasia and Russia is what I specialize in. And I want to talk about unusual life forms that exist on this planet. Someday I'll tell you more. If you like my research and can help, please do so through the links listed in the description to this video. I appreciate your time, and I hope to bring you more videos soon. Thank you.